Welcome to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Show, where our mission is to inspire, impact, and influence other immigrant entrepreneurs to follow their dreams and create the future they want. My guest today is Ukeme Awakessien Jeter. Welcome to the show, Ukeme.
Ali, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Such a pleasure having you on, I'm telling you. We just chatted a little bit off camera before I hit record, and I told you, I'm feeling your energy and I'm really excited for this conversation. So Ukeme, tell us about yourself, and obviously you're an immigrant, your immigrant story, and how you came to the US and when.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you're doing something incredible, just having space for immigrants. So kudos to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd actually never really thought about that concept of space for immigrant stories. We tend to just come and want to blend in and be in the melting pot, and there's some perils to that, which I'll talk to that later, especially because in America, we are the land of immigrants. That is the beauty about the American experience. But I immigrated to the United States at the age of 18. I'll tell you how long ago that was, but a long time ago, over 2 decades ago. And I came here for college. I came to go to university here. That is the second top reason that people immigrate to the United States is education. So I came here. I went to the University of Maine. I came here from Nigeria, and went to University of Maine up in the Northeast. A little bit about why I chose Maine is because up until that point in my life, I had never seen snow a day in my life. Houston was another option, but I was like, never seen snow before. I will go to Maine, and boy, did I see snow. I feel a little bit differently and less excited about snow than when I came here over 2 decades ago. So I went to University of Maine. I'm a little bit the quintessential immigrant in the sense that I was a STEM kid. So my undergrad is in mechanical engineering. My parents, in supporting the journey to come here, they're like, you can't be an English major. There was like a short list of the things I could be. Engineering happened to be the one that struck me. And so I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree and started my soiree into the American life. Now, when I came here on my F1 visa, I wasn't entirely sure what happens after that, right? But I started to learn the different visa statuses. I went on my OPT and did optional practical training. Then I found an employer that sponsored my H-1B visa, which was my work visa. I worked as an engineer for almost 7 years, and then I pivoted. I went back to school because we know that work visa is only for 6 years. I went back to school and became a lawyer. A couple of things there. I had hit the ceiling with my work visa, both in time and what I was doing in the company. And I wanted to reset the immigration clock. And so I went back and became a student, and now I'm a lawyer. So I went to law school. I graduated with a law degree, and I practice law. Now, gosh, it's been 3 years now. I entered the soiree into public service. And I am now an elected official. I'm the mayor of my city, a wonderful city of Upper Arlington, a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow, I love that. What a journey. And, so I want to talk about a little bit when you came to the US as an immigrant. Obviously, I guess coming from Nigeria, you would already speak the language, right?
Yes. English was not my barrier, but I will tell you what. Idioms and accents that, and I talk a bit about in my book about the accent bias. So people were speaking English to me, but sometimes I was like, what are you saying? Because we tend to, in America, we use a lot of sports references in how we talk. So I remember, and I write about this, I remember the first time a student was like, oh, be a home run to the assignment. I'm like, what is a home run? Right? It's a baseball idiom. It's English. Home and run sound like English, but what does it mean? It felt like a different language, even if it was English, right? Here they say trunk. In Nigeria, we say boot for the back of the car, right? elevator, lift. Like, it's just the words took some getting used to. Let's just say that.
Right. And speaking of sports language, is, when I first time heard someone saying he's on the fence, I was like, he's on the fence? Is like someone really on the fence? What does that mean? So yeah, I can totally relate to that. Okay. So, and then how, when obviously you shifted from engineering to becoming a lawyer,
Mm,
which is a completely different world. Tell us about
yeah,
that, and how did that happen?
yeah. Yes, completely different world. But so I was an engineer, I was a mechanical engineer. I'll take it, I'll even take it a step further. I was a pulp and paper engineer, which meant I was an engineer that understood the process of making paper. I can tell you the tensile strength of paper, how soft paper should be, how tough it should be. But that was as a result of how I was developed in the workplace. So the thing with immigrants, especially when you're on this highly skilled immigrant track, right? I had a H-1B visa. I was an engineer. And that's just how I was developed at work. I would put my hands up. Like at one point, I wanted to go into operations. I thought maybe I should learn some operations rules. And I was literally told by a boss, it was going to be so hard for me to replace you as an engineer, like with your skill and what you know. It's easier for me to find someone in strategy or find, because I have my MBA, and I actually got my MBA, like the company sponsored me to get my MBA. And I got my MBA, but instead of allowing me to do work in which I could use my MBA, so strategy and finance, and that was my focus with my MBA, I always got it's easier for us to find that person, the MBA, finance, than it's going to be for us to find a highly skilled engineer like you. So I was in this rat race where, yes, I'm a highly skilled immigrant. Yes, I have this deep knowledge of a certain area, and you are expecting me to do only that work. And so I hit a ceiling. I just felt like I wasn't developing further. I was looking at my life 25 years from now. I'm like, am I still going to be a pulp and paper engineer 25 years from now? And that just didn't sit well with me, but I didn't have an out, right?
Mhm.
With the way the visa statuses work, being on a H-1B, you're sponsored by that company. Even as I started to look into other companies, maybe transitioning to a different company, they still wanted me to be that engineer, right? That would be the only way I was getting hired. And so that in my mind, like pivoting and becoming a lawyer and going with something different and completely broader, like I think about law and all the different things you can do in law, was a strategic decision. It was a strategic decision, to keep
Mhm.
me in the country at that point. I've been here almost a decade of my life. I've, done all the things. To keep me in the country, keep me legal on kind of like a particular visa status, but also get me into a space that was broader than just engineering.
I get that.
Yeah.
So, and then what happened from there? Getting into law, and now you're
Yes.
getting into something completely new. So tell us more about that.
Well, isn't it that's like a special newcomer story? You're always reinventing. It certainly has been my story to not be
Mhm.
afraid to reinvent, not be afraid to try something new. I think that adaptability just comes from my immigrant experience. But no, I went to law school, and while in law school, I didn't completely know this before, but while in law school, I discovered this particular type of practice of law, which is intellectual property. So it's an area of law I like to say more broadly. I'm an innovation attorney. So what I do is I help companies bring new products and services to market, anywhere from startups to like major corporations, any new ideas or new products that are coming to market. I help with the legal work around that. And I discovered that area of law deeply while in law school, latched onto it. It was a great way to leverage what I'd already done in engineering, since I was in product development and kind of like project engineering. It was a great way to leverage that skills that I'd already brought. And so, but I was also a non-traditional student. When I went to law school, I was turning 30. So, I was also in the stage in my life where marriage was important for me as a value, something that I wanted. So I was married my second year of law school. I had my daughter my last year of law school, my first child my last year of law school. So life was still happening while I'm trying to pivot into a new area of work and focus. And that changed, coming out of law school when I graduated. My daughter was 3 months old, and she came to graduation with me in her little baby carrier. That shaped how I entered the career of law, right? I entered as a mom, so I had to do things a bit differently. But I started out in private practice in a law firm because I just found it was a little bit more flexible, since the law as a career is about billing hours, so how many hours I put in on a client. So I was able to do that for the first few years of my legal career, and then I transitioned in-house. In-house meaning I worked for a corporation, a large, I think they're a large Fortune 100 company in Columbus, Ohio. So I ended up actually even moving from where I went to law school to take this job in-house in the corporate legal department, continuing to do the same type of work, which is help advise as they're bringing in new products, those partnerships, if you're co-collaborating on a project, all that kind of stuff, and deeply enjoyed law and what I was doing. But with the move, I'd also moved to a new community. And in that new community, we were a minority in that community. My community is like 1% of the community is Black. So my daughter started to experience things in the community about fitting in and belonging. And I didn't like what she was experiencing. So she was coming home and saying, "Mom, can I straighten my hair for school tomorrow?" She was trying to be, and this is someone that has grown up in a multicultural home. And as a result of those experiences, it became important for me to understand how the city ran. And that's when I made another pivot to run for office. As I started by serving in civic groups within the city. And then 2020 happens, and everyone remembers what 2020 was, not only for the pandemic, but we had George Floyd. And I thought, man, the leaders of our city are very important in how people belong within community and how people feel about their community. And I thought, I could offer a perspective to leadership that was missing as a newcomer. So I ran for office. That I always talk about this, about the naiveness of a newcomer, right? Because people are like, "Oh my God, that's bold. You only lived in the community for 3 years. What in the world? How did you even think?" I didn't know, but I knew that I could do the work. I knew that I could campaign. I knew that I could galvanize people. I had a grassroots campaign. And it was important for me, and the purpose of why I was running was to build a community that my children would grow up in. And when I held on to those ideas and those ideals, it made pivoting into that space of running for office important. And so to everyone's surprise, probably, except mine and my team, we had a successful campaign and we won. And that leads to the story of why I wrote my book, Immigrant. Because when I won, I made history, right? First immigrant, first person of color elected to office in my community. At the time, my city was 103 years old. It's 105 years old now, right? So this 103-year-old community has been in existence, and we're still making history as first. Well, that honor of being this history maker and the first elected to office led my alma mater, University of Maine, the school that I immigrated here to come to college, to call me to be the commencement speaker. So in 2022, I went off back to the University of Maine to be the commencement speaker. Full circle moment, right? almost 2 decades ago, I was sitting in the chair with those students. And you think about when you're giving a commencement speech, your audience, they're looking for, what does the world look like out there? Like, they're looking for, like, you were a student, like, what was that? And for me, my American story has always been an immigrant story. That's entirely the reason I came to America, and has been, I mean, thinking about all the visas I've been on, like, my story is always the immigrant story. And so I told, and the thing about the immigrant story is you have to learn to adapt quickly. You can't take no for an answer, because you have to persevere. Even if you get no for an answer, you got to keep asking. You've got to be resourceful, and we talked about this a little bit. It doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is. You could come here as a refugee or asylee with zero. Or you could come here with a lot of money, and you still have to be resourceful. What bank are you going to open? You've got to learn new systems quickly. And so when I talked, and one other thing as an immigrant is you've got to learn to just go with the flow. Sometimes you have to live life off script, right? Your well-laid plans may not come to fruition, but it doesn't mean that you stop. And so when I gave my commencement speech, these were the themes within my commencement speech, right? And I ended with the aura of, go out there, get it done, but also be open to living life off script. When I was done my commencement speech, the trustees of the university and your commencement speaker, you kind of stand there and help the graduates go out, they congratulate them, all those kind of things. And so, of course, you're getting the, oh my God, great speech, blah, yada, yada. But an international student comes up to me and planted the idea for the book, because that international student said to me, up until your speech, I had never considered my immigrant experience as leadership skills, as leadership potential. I've always seen it as like the immigrant struggle. And this light bulb went off in my head, because it's true. And that's why I thanked you earlier for this space, having this podcast as a space, because we tend to talk about immigration in such a struggle bus narrative, right? And then when we have the stories of the thriving immigrants, and we have plenty of those stories, we coin it the American dream and leave it at that. That's a story that can only happen in America. That's the American dream, right? Because of our resources, because of who America is, you achieved, right? We don't tend to say, your experience as an immigrant has given you these skills to lead. And we know that the leaders of the 21st century is not about your IQ, but it's about how quickly can you pivot to market conditions? How resourceful are you with your talent? How well do you know your shifting customer taste? How do you have varying sales strategies for your multicultural customer base? Right? That's the mark of fantastic leadership. Now, while immigrants are not a monolithic group by any means, we have common threads in the very process of immigrating that give us those skills: adaptability, perseverance, resilience, grit, sheer grit. And we know that grit is not something you're born with. Grit is something that you learn from experiences. Like the passion and perseverance together give you grit. So you've got to go through things. So yes, is the hallmark of our story perseverance and resistance? Sure. But it's more than that. It also is leadership qualities. And that's why the idea for Immigrit came up. And I was just so like, when the light bulb goes off, and I thought, there's a book about this, right? But then I find out that only 3% of Fortune 100 CEOs are immigrants. 3%. And our country is made up of 14% immigrants. Half of the Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants. So why is only 3% being led by immigrants? I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I started to write, and it just started to flow. And I started talking with immigrants and researchers and HR professionals and talent development professionals. And I decided I was going to write a leadership book for leaders to help them understand how to harness their immigrant talent. So there you have it.
Boom, boom, awesome. So many things. As I was listening to you, I was taking notes. So many things that I want to touch on. Number one, you said I was almost being naive a little bit. I was not knowing what I'm getting myself into, which I believe is a strength that we immigrants have, because we tend sometimes not to overthink things that others that were born in a country are going to overthink it, right? Because we don't know what's out there, what could go wrong, because we just don't know, right? So when you don't know, you just get started, you get yourself into something that you don't know what's going to come out on the other side, which means also you might overthink things less, right? Which means also you might get to opportunities that other people not will get into because they tend to overthink, right? That's number one. Number two, when you told me the story about your daughter going to school that, you guys were minorities, we immigrant also tend to, we want to fit in, right? We want to fit in when we get into a new country. We don't want to be, because most of the time, so I grew up in Switzerland. I came here as a kid. When, I wanted to, I look different than 99% of the people because I was going into school in a small town, almost a village. And so we had 2 foreigners in the entire class. It was me and someone from Italy. It was the 2 of us, right? So I wanted to fit in until decades later, I learned that, hey, not fitting in and having seen the things and being through the experiences that I have been through, it actually made who I am today. And I can use it as a strength, which will give me more confidence, to do the things that I'm qualified to do, because I'm the only one, based on the experiences I have been through, qualified to do these things, right? So I can relate to all the things that you said. So now I want to talk about your book a little bit, because it's something that has never been done before. And trust me, I have done my research. And there have been immigrant stories, books based on immigrant stories, right? But nothing based on leadership and all the things that you're covering in your book. So while writing this book and doing all the research, what were some surprises that you are like, oh, I didn't think about that, and I never expected this, that you faced while doing the writing on your book?
For me, perhaps the biggest thing was the unique biases that impact immigrants, because we don't understand intersectionality well in the workplace. We shove people into certain categories based on the very simplistic lack of understanding of multiculturalism. I'll give this in a story, and I tell this story in the book, and it helps illuminate what happens in the workplace. You look at me, facially I'm Black, right? I remember my first Martin Luther King Jr. holiday on campus at the University of Maine. Now, it's a long weekend for students. They've gone to the separate places. I'm from Nigeria. I'm not going home for the long weekend. But I'm strolling across campus, and up comes a reporter. And the reporter is like, can we interview you? And of course, I don't ask, I'm like, oh, sure. And the reporter asks, what does MLK does Martin Luther King Jr. mean to you? Now, I am 6 months in the country, okay? I know who Martin Luther King is, but I didn't grow, that's like not my history. That's not my story. I know a little bit about the civil rights era, but not massively. Why would I study American history in Nigeria when I also have my Nigerian history to study, right? But there was this expectation, just because I was Black, that I knew it. I remember the interview, like I was just kind of like this, my mouth was agape, the reporter's like, and I'm like, I responded, I know who he is, but I'm Nigerian, right? We do the same things in the workplace, right? I come into the workplace and you miss the intersectionality that I am a Black immigrant woman. So if you try to develop me like a Black talent, I have said like Black excellence is a term that is used in America, like Black girl magic, all this kind of stuff. Listen, I have seen Black doctors, they're prevalent. That's all our doctors in Nigeria are Black teachers, like it's not unusual for me to see or hear these stories, right? But you come here and because of the systems, because of the oppression, because of what was civil rights era, because of slavery, those are not the stories that they see. And so we tend to develop in that way in our workplace and we shove them into the box. You would be better developing me as a woman if you understood intersectionality. Because for me as a Nigerian woman, gender bias was a bigger issue for me, right? I'm expected to be in the kitchen. Like, why are you getting a mechanical engineering degree? Like, I literally heard that when I was leaving Nigeria from people saying, what are you going to do with that? Like, your job is to be a homemaker, right? And so this failure of us to understand intersectionality leads to unique immigrant biases in the workplace. And that was my experience. And the two of them, I'll go back a little bit. I was actually shocked that we didn't track immigrants in the workplace. So none of the HR professionals I talked to, they're like, Ukeme, we haven't even finished dealing with our D&I stuff. Like, why would we add a layer of immigrants? And I say, well, we can't change what we don't measure, what we don't know. 1 in 5 people in the workplace by 2035 is going to be an immigrant. They are a very important part of your talent force, of your workforce. You need to know them so you can develop them, so you can understand what is going on with them. And then the second thing I was going to say is these biases. There's 2 predominant biases that are unique to immigrants. It's the accent bias, because here in America, we attach intelligence to how someone sounds. It is the most obnoxious thing. There's actually some people actually studying discrimination that comes as a result of accent, and it impacts immigrants in the workplace. And it's also interesting because it's multi-layered. If we hear a British accent, we say, "Ooh, that's smart." But if we hear a Nigerian accent, or what is called the African accent, or we hear a Spanish accent, we're like, what are you saying? You don't understand. We instantly, unconsciously, in our head, think they're dumb, right? But the law of gravity, I'm an engineer, so I love STEM. The law of gravity is the same, whether you learn it in English, in Swahili, in French, in Spanish, and we fail to see that, right? We tend to think a Spanish engineer could not be as smart as an American engineer. The second thing is the education bias. So this accent bias directly leads into the education bias. The education bias is where we attach quality of education to where the education is received. And it's not just in the workplace, but even the way our certification processes work. So I'll take engineering again as an example, because that's my background. There's a professional engineering exam, which is a certification that you can get. Well, the certification says you have to have your engineering degree from an American accredited university. Well, guess who the American Accreditation Board credits for universities? American universities. I'm like, but German universities and Turkish universities all have engineering programs, and they also learn the same things. STEM is the same. Doctors, similar thing. The heart is the same in every human body. I have not pulled a human where the heart was not located in the same place. So if you learn medicine in a different country and you're a cardiologist, you know where the heart is based on your audience in your country. And so it's a very multi-layered thing, because we say we want talent and but then we're like, ooh, but you have to get it. You have to get your education here in America for us to validate it. So these are the things you intuitively know it, but in the research, how prevalent it is. That now, actually just recently did a post about this, that now when I hear, oh, we have a talent shortage, I say, do we really though? Because 25% of immigrants in the United States are underutilized, meaning they are working a job that is not at their skill fit. 25%. So is that a talent shortage, or is that a failure of us to leverage the talent that we have? That's my long answer for like the surprise. And there were a lot of surprises, but definitely our talent utilization, because of these biases and our failure of understanding intersectionality, was a big miss in the workplace.
Thank you for explaining that. You know, when we do things like you writing this book, it takes so much energy and time and dedication, and really going into without knowing, like, let's talk finances, financially, what to expect, or even anything to expect, right? You're just pouring your heart and soul and sweat into this without knowing what's going to come out. So what I'm trying to say is, there needs to be a deep source of motivation that gives you the fuel to push through everything, every challenge that you face in this project. Where did you get that from? And just being an immigrant is not enough, there needs to be something that keeps you going.
Yeah. I have endured a few losses in life, young losses. I lost my brother when he was very young. I lost an aunt when we were very young. And, I'm a big fan of the Hamilton soundtrack. And there's a Hamilton song that says, you left no instructions when you left, just a legacy to protect. And I think if the legacies that I've heard that I feel from the losses I endured early is, you've got to give life everything that you like. It's a shame to not give your talent and your skills, and advocate and use your voice for a group of people, however small or big that role is, while there is still life within you. So that has always motivated me, not to be morbid here, but we get one shot at this thing called life, right? My dad likes to say, this is not a dress rehearsal. This is it, like break a leg. And so when you talk about like that deep motivation to keep going, it's a privilege every day for me to be here, and so I say I'm gonna give a life 100% of my skills while I'm at it.
What a pure and nice and amazing source of motivation to have. I really like that. So do you get, I just wonder, do you get to work also outside of the book project? Did you get to work with a lot of immigrants and, have exchange and be part of their story and listen to their stories?
Yeah. This is where you're old, when you have a lot of mentees. that's another way of saying you're old, okay? But being a leader, again, my story is always the immigration story. The immigrants tend to find me in any way that I can mentor. I always have in the workplace. And so that keeps me attuned to like the present, like what's now. And I love mentoring specifically for that. In fact, before I call, I just got off a audio event where I was talking with mostly the student immigrant population and the students that are going to be in our workplace. And what does that look like? How do you build your networks? What do social networks look like? Because there's a, you know, immigrants, we put our heads down, we work, we rely a lot on our skills. We think our skills are going to get us so far. But there's another side to success. The other side of success, yes, you can use your skills to build your confidence. Like I teased earlier that I was a toilet paper engineer, but that deep skill gave me confidence that you cannot knock me off my peg when I tell you that it's this, because I have the skills for that. So if anything, use your skills. I always say to immigrants and mentees, use your skills to build your confidence, to make you unwavering about that. But you cannot rely on it to get you to the places that you need to go to. That is all about exposure, your political capital, how you build your social networks. And so to your question of, yes, did I talk to a lot of immigrants? I'm always in that process of learning. I've built teams, I've led teams. It was interesting to write. I feel like a big audience for this book is talent development professionals and HR professionals. I've never had a career in HR, but I know how to use human resources to advance your leadership. Like the leadership is all about how you inspire and motivate people to do the work, to do the objectives. And so to that end, I have a lot of experience just building and leading teams.
So obviously you got my curiosity, and I'm sure you got the curiosity of our audience, saying relying on your skills is going to get you that far, but also building your network and you know your I don't remember the exact word what you said.
Capital.
So political capital. Thank you. So give us more insights about that and how someone can utilize on that.
Yeah. For me, I would say start where you are. You can't, and by start where you are, I mean the community you're already part of, the groups you're already part of. Think about ways to volunteer. Your ear's already on the ground to what is needed. I think people think leadership and they think this very grand. If I pulled it back to some of my mentees as this, it's seeing something that needs to be changed or understanding something that will make a group of people's lives better and figuring out a way to get that to them. That's leadership, right? So I say you're part of a community group, your community is trying to figure out how do we change this community garden, or how do we get more kids to the library, or like there's a myriad of issues that happen in the community. And you think to yourself, oh, here's what we need, here's how I organize, here's my volunteers. Those things build your social capital, your political capital, and your, what I call your brand whisper. Your brand whisper is your ability to get things done, right? They say, she's the person you need to call. That's your brand whisper. I had a mentee recently tell a story of how she volunteered at a soup kitchen. And in line in the soup kitchen was a CEO that's now one of her mentors. Didn't know that, right? The CEO is in the kitchen also doing the soup kitchen. And they strike up a conversation and they're having a great conversation. And when they were done, again, maybe that naiveness of an immigrant, the fact you don't know who that person is, it was like, oh my God, I really enjoyed the conversation. Can we grab coffee or something sometime? And this person gives a card and it's a freaking CEO, right? And so I was like, oh my God. I'm like, why are you freaking out about, like, you already have enough of the experience from your volunteering that's bonded you to. Now just build the relationship. Learn how to build relationships from doing things within your community that is outside of the pressure of what am I doing at work. We tend to want to build our networks at work, but that's so pressure filling. Like you feel like you have to do things a certain way, whatever. Go into your community and build your network that way.
Awesome. So what are the common challenges that you see that immigrants go through? What are the obstacles that, having your mindset, having your experience, being an immigrant yourself, you see, hey, this is actually, if you just change the perspective and the way you're thinking, then you might gonna overcome these challenges and obstacles.
Yeah. I mean, you've pretty much hit on it. It's our mindset. That's our biggest challenge. And I like to say it this way. We can't take on people's stereotypes, perceptions, biases. What do I mean by this? I mean, if you feel a slight, say, because sometimes, like, I'll hear someone say, oh, I talked to this person and they, based on how they looked, or they were like, you take on a slight based on how you feel that person responded to you or any of that. It's not our job to absorb that, right? That's on that person. In fact, what you can do is ask, what do you mean by that? Right? We like to say, oh, that was shade. That person threw shade. Well, don't own it. Ask them what they meant by that, right? Give them, like, throw it back on them to work out their own bias. Like, oh, well, you can't do, like, if someone says, oh, you can't do that because of blah, blah, yada, yada. What do you mean by that? Why do you think I can't? What about my experience is giving you that perception? Do that rather than own the fact that that person said, because of blah, 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 you can't do that. That's a mindset thing. That's a perspective thing. We tend to take on people's views of us rather than use the opportunity to make sure they understand they have an ill view that they shouldn't.
That's very powerful. Thank you. Would you mind telling us a little more, just a little tiny bit more about your book and what's in the book and what you cover in the book without giving all the nuggets away?
Well, I write the book in 3 parts. It's intended. I know I was writing for busy leaders, so it's intended to be a quick read. Only about 222 pages here, but I broke it up in 3 parts. The first part, I kind of put immigration in context. By that, I give a good kind of overview of immigration. While I talk America-centric, it's not completely intended for an American audience. America is the land of immigrants, and it does have the largest global migration population. That said, I put immigration and why do people migrate in context and give kind of a overview of that, and then talk about how immigration shapes us, because immigration does shape culture. It does shape, population, right? It shapes us in different ways. So that's part 1 of the book. Then in part 2 of the book, I dive in a little bit more into the unique biases that I talked about earlier, and how sometimes immigration is missing from our discourse around diversity. We don't talk about it, raise it. We just kind of see it as a struggle bus, and it's almost like we're not a people. I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's missing from the discourse completely. And so I share a little bit about why is immigration missing from all these discourses. It's missing in the discourse around leadership. It's missing in the discourse around its influences in leadership. It's missing in the discourse around diversity, all those kind of things. And I talk about the biases. Then in part 3 of the book, I talk about Immigrit, which is, again, this ubiquitous term that I kind of came up with as I was writing about the skill sets that immigrants have. And then I dive into why those skills, Immigrit, is our leadership competencies, how we can harness it, how we can cultivate it, and how we can sustain it in the workplace. So that's kind of like how part 3 is written. And then I obviously, part with some words kind of looking at the future, right? Like I say, 1 in 5 people in the workplace by 2035 is an immigrant. So how are we preparing for that future is kind of how I end in part of the book.
I love it. I love that. And where can people get the book?
Well, it is available Tuesday, June 11th is its official launch date, but people can pre-order it now. It's available everywhere. Barnes and Nobles, my publisher did a good job about anywhere that people buy their books, they will find Immigrit. Barnes and Nobles, Apple Books, Amazon, any indie bookstore that you, is it Indie Books? I think is the indie bookstore online source. So all of those places, it's available everywhere. And you know what, Ali, I'll say this because I know sometimes books is not for everyone or people need a teaser. I developed kind of like a roadmap on building effective leadership pipelines specifically for immigrant talent. And you can go to www.immigritbook, so Immigrit, the word book.com, and you can download that roadmap. It's like a 4-step guide with some journaling activity that people can do. And that's a good initial read if people want to read that and then get the book some other time. There's also that for people.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I could go on for way longer, but I want to respect your time. You're a busy person, so I don't want to make it longer. But we're building a community for immigrant entrepreneurs, and I would love to have you in there. Just having you with all the things that you have been through in your life, all the knowledge and skills that you have to share with our actually community would be an amazing thing. So I would love for you to have you in there.
I'd be honored. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So it was a huge pleasure having you on, sharing your story, but also all the great advice and all the great expertise that you shared with our audience. So thank you so much for coming on. And I look forward getting the book myself and going through it and learning something new.
Thank you, Ali.